Okay, we can start now. I'll turn on the first.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Norma Jellison, and I am the current Whale Watch Program Coordinator. I want to thank you all for being here, and I also want to acknowledge the team that assists with Whale Watch so ably. And you've already been introduced to Colleen and Rich Draffin, who are with us remote. And in the back of the room, who they can wave, is Jeff Goldman and Jennifer Cicchinini, who will be taking over for me as the program coordinator in the new Whale Watch season. Richard Phipps is with us today. And there are a number of people in the room who are returning volunteers. And if they could just wave their hands, I see Larry and Jean and the Moores and yeah, a whole bunch of folks. Steve in the front here. So we have quite a number of volunteers who come out. A lot of them, like Jeff, is Mr. Saturday, so he's there almost every Saturday. And Richard is Mr. Sunday, he's there almost every Sunday. And then the Draffins are with us a couple of times a month. And with that, I'll get started with the presentation. And if you have questions, it would probably be best to save them for the end so I can get to them all. But let's go then. So I'm gonna be talking about the Pacific, the Eastern North Pacific gray whale. And it is a mammal, it's a marine mammal. The cetacean, there's a new name before the cetaceans, but we'll just stay with cetacean. And that includes whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And I have a poster on the side here on the table of all of the California marine mammals that you're likely to see at the coast, or not likely, but may see at the coast. And the thing about an Eastern North Pacific gray whale is that it's visible from shore, which is great. It means you don't have to get on a boat and worry about getting seasick. Come up to the head, and if they're out there, we'll see them. The gray whale, it migrates along the northern Pacific coast between the Arctic Sea and the lagoons of Baja California. Can you go through some additional slides, please? Catch up with me. Okay. So what's unique about this whale, the gray whale, and I thank you for bearing with me with my mask on. I hope you can hear me, but I've been fighting a cold all week and I thought I'd be cautious and wear a mask and sit over here in the corner. So the gray whale has a very streamlined body, and it has a narrow tapered head. It's gray. It's mottled because of the barnacles that are on it, and it has no dorsal fin. Many of the other baleen whales, and the baleen whales are predominantly the larger of the whales, the blue whale, which is the largest, the fin whale, the say. They have baleen in their mouth, not teeth, but one of the large whales does have teeth, and that's the sperm whale. But for the most part, the baleen whales have no teeth. They have baleen in their upper jaw. And we have an example of baleen over on the table here. If you want to take a look later. This is baleen. It's in their upper jaw. There are a number of plates, hundreds of plates. And the baleen in their upper jaw is composed of keratin, which is the same thing as your fingernails in your hair, the same composition. And unlike other baleen whales, the Pacific whale has no dorsal fin, no top fin. it's a straight back, but it has many, knuckles. So you can, when the whale comes up, it's one of the distinguishing factors is you won't see a dorsal fin, which even with a blue whale, which is huge, 80 to 100 feet, it has a very tiny dorsal fin, as do the other cetaceans, the other baleen whales, but this whale has none. It has about 6 to 12 knuckles, we call them, along the back, which is essentially their rib. And we have a rib bone on the table as well as a part of of the dorsal, the part of the dorsal, as you can see along the dorsal top of the whale. So its flippers are also distinctive in that they're fairly small and they're paddle shaped. And if, you know, one of the whales that you're very likely to see when you're out at the coast, not necessarily at the same time as the gray whale, is the humpback. The humpbacks have very long flippers, and they're called wings. And the humpbacks also are very, very acrobatic. So you'll see them breaching a lot. Gray whales don't breach that much. It's not that they don't, but they're not acrobatic like a humpback. And their flippers, their paddle-like flippers actually have bones in them, just like our fingers. And then their fluke is about 10 to 12 feet across. It's very pointed at the tips and it has a deep center knot. So the size of these whales, while they're large, of course, when they're out in the ocean, they don't look that large, but they're about a middle-sized whale. So they're not 100 feet, they're not 80 feet like a fin or a blue. They're between 45 and 50 feet, depending upon if they're a male or a female. And the female is larger because, of course, she's going to be carrying a calf when she is pregnant. The calves are 12 to 15 feet, and they weigh, the adults can weigh up to 45 tons. The calves, when they're born, weigh 1,200, 1,500, 2,000 pounds when they're born, and they can double in size in about a year. And that's because they're eating down in the lagoons. Their mothers are feeding them milk, which is very high fat content, so they can double in size while they're in the lagoon. Next slide. They're a fairly slow moving whale. They only swim about 3 to 5 miles an hour, as opposed to some of the other whales like the humpback again, which is a very fast swimming whale. Their breathing pattern, which helps us when we first see a blow to really track them, is that they generally will blow 3 to 5 times in very short 15 to 30 second intervals, and then they'll dive. And they can dive, they generally go down maybe 2 to 5 minutes, but they can stay down for up to 15 minutes. And again, their blow is fairly distinctive in that it's either bushy or heart-shaped, as in the photo on the screen. And they're covered with barnacles and lice, and that gives them the splotchy appearance of the gray with like splotches on it, is because of the barnacles when they fall off. And there are the barnacles only found on the gray whale, and they live out their life cycle on the gray whale. As far as the lice, which are the pink creatures that you see around the barnacles on this slide, there are 3 kinds of lice on the gray whale. two of them are only on the gray whale. I'm going to point out an interesting fact here is that one of the lice, and you'll see this name other places, is Scamani. And that's named after Charles Scammon, who was actually a whaler for many, many years, and then became a naturalist and wrote a book about the history of the gray whale and the whaling in the lagoons in the west coast of the United States. Thank you. So this is a picture that just shows what the whale looks like in profile, and you can see the knuckles that I mentioned and no real dorsal fin, the little paddle-like fins that it has, and then the barnacles that grow on the whale, and then the three kinds of whale life that I mentioned. So the life cycle of this whale is that it reaches maturity in about between 5 and 11 years, and between 36 and 39 feet. The mother carries the calf for 12 to 13 months, and she calves about every 2 years and is nursing that calf 7 to 8 months with about 50 gallons of milk a day. And the milk of a gray whale is very high fat content, 53% fat content compared to our 2% milk, and 15 times the fat of cow's milk. And why is that important is because it really allows that calf to grow quite a lot while it's down in the lagoons in Baja. Next slide. So the gray whale breeds on the southbound migration, mostly in Southern California, mostly in Southern California waters and in the Pacific lagoons of Baja. In Ojo de Liebre, which Scammons Lagoon is another name for that lagoon, and then Laguna de San Ignacio, which is where many people go to interact with the whales. They call them the friendlies in that lagoon. They will swim, the mother will push the calf right up to the boat so that people can touch the baby, which is kind of interesting since gray whales were hunted almost to extinction, that a mother could trust humans to have such close encounter and touching of her calf. And then the last place that you might see them, at least traditionally, has been in Magdalena Bay, which is the furthest south in Baja Sur. But recently, many of the whales have been swimming around the tip and up into the Sea of Cortez. And while the cows are mostly born there in these lagoons that I've mentioned, they also can be born during the migrations. But why did they go to the lagoons? Well, they're feeding the adults, and particularly the pregnant females, are feeding up in Alaska in the cold, rich Bering Sea waters up there, and the Chukchi and the Beaufort Seas, where their main prey lives in the bottom sediment. But then they migrate down the coast of Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and California. We used to call them California whales. And, but, there was sort of an objection by Alaska, Washington, and Oregon, because they say, well, the whales go by us too. How come they are called California whales? So we really call them now Northern Pacific gray whales. But they go to the lagoon because the water is really very warm there, and it has a high salt content, which makes the water very buoyant So when the calf is born, it's easy for the mother to keep it aloft so that it can come up to breathe. Because it is a mammal, so it does need to breathe air like we do. Next slide. So this migration is 10 to 14,000 miles on an average is 12,000. And it round trip. And that really, it depends on where they start, where they've been feeding, whether they've been feeding in the Bering, the Chukchi, or the Beaufort Sea, and where they go, which of the lagoons in Baja they go to. And the round trip is really one of the longest of all the mammal species migrations. And she's traveling, they all are traveling, the males, the females, the juveniles, they only are traveling 45 miles an hour, about 80 miles a day, and they generally are moving through the waters or migrating, swimming about 24 hours a day. And one of the factors associated with that 4 to 5 mile an hour speed is that the barnacles don't get knocked off by the velocity of the water as they do with whales who breach quite a lot and travel quickly, faster. And then how can they possibly be migrating 24 hours a day? Well, it's because they have a unihemispheric brain. So they can actually shut down half of their brains at a time and continue to surface, to breathe, and migrate, swim. So they go south from Alaska in about the month of October, and that is really a function of when the ice begins to settle into the oceans up there, and it kind of forces them out because they can't get to their food source. And it takes them about 2 to 3 months. And when they're going south, they're generally out on the horizon. They're using the California current, which pretty much goes north-south past us on the horizon. And we can see the blows. That's how we'll identify that there's a whale moving through. And the migration is led by the near-term pregnant mothers, the females, who are anxious to get down to warmer waters, which do warm up in Southern California, and they may have, as I said, in Southern California. But in the Baja lagoons, it's very warm there, so they're anxious to get there to have this calf. And following the near-term pregnant females will come the mature males and females, and then followed by, at the end, the immatures, some of who may not make the full migration. So they will hang around and we'll see them. And once the northbound migration starts, sometimes we'll have to pay attention to whether the whales are moving north or they're moving south, because they kind of conjoin. And they're in the lagoons in Baja. And the lagoons are not just where they go to have their calves, but the lagoons are where they go to mate. So when you're down there in the lagoons, or if you see some videos about the Baja lagoons, you'll see a lot of mating behavior. This is where you'll see the most breaching of the gray whales, which they otherwise don't breach that much. But when they're mating, they do. And they're in the lagoons about 2 to 3 months on average between December and April. And that's why we see the northbound migration here, which is a 2 to 3 month journey. Generally, we start to see them going north consistently, able to possibly see them going north And I say possibly see them, because we have a vest here that all of the whale watchers use. But you wanna stay up, does it?
No, it really doesn't.
Can you define breaching?
This is the whale watch vest that everybody wears that's a volunteer. Has a state park logo on it, and then it says whale watch. And my joke is, it says whale watch, not whale see. Because there's no guarantee that we're gonna see a whale out there. You just have to be patient and consistent and keep your eyes on the sea.
Norma, when is the peak time to see whales from Bodega Head? I just missed it.
Well, in the southbound migration, it is the January, February timeframe through about the middle of March. And then in the northbound, the difference is it starts and picks up and continues on. It can continue on through the end of May. But everything is really shifting because of the climate change, because of the temperature of the waters, because of the prey availability, because of when it ices up in Alaska. So, however, we do whale watch from January through May, because that's the most consistently opportune time to see the whales as they're either going south or north. And as I said, the northbound migration is again a couple of months long. And in that migration, they're very much closer to shore because they're using a different current. They're using the Davidson current, which is the north trending current. So they take advantage of the currents to assist them in swimming. So when they're going south, they're using the California current, which is a southbound current. And when they're going north, they're using the Davidson current, which is closer into shore, and it is a northbound, a northern directional current. And the first whales to come through in that early period are the newly pregnant females. So they're the females who got pregnant either on the way down to the lagoons or in the lagoon. And that generally happens around January through mid-February out at the head. And then next will come the males, the immature females, and the immature males. And the last to come by Bodega Head will be the mothers and the calves. And they generally are coming by April, May, and into June, peaking in middle of May. But again, things are variable given the changing climatic conditions. But they are, the mothers and calves are the closest to shore. So they really hug the coastline very closely because the mother is still nursing that calf, and it's a baby. So it needs to stop and it needs to rest. And they generally will go into coves like the one just south of Bodega Head, nearer to the jetty, and then to the north in Horseshoe Cove, which is adjacent to the Bodega Marine Lab to the north of us. And when they come by, sometimes they're so close, you feel like you can reach out and touch them. It's really, the northbound migration is the most dramatic because they are so close and so visible. And this map really shows their birthing and mating grounds, and then where they go to feed in Alaska. So yeah, we're gonna try to get it to stop falling over. Yeah. So the feeding. So again, they feed mostly in Alaska, in the three Chukchi, Bering, and Beaufort Seas, for about 5 months until the ice forms. And that is important because the ice plankton grows underneath the ice, and then the plankton falls down into the sediment. And the sediment, it feeds the prey that they like so much. However, they're opportunistic feeders, so they will feed during migration. And again, I'm going to talk about some of the changes in the climate and the ocean conditions that are really changing what we know and what we see and observe about the migration. But while they're opportunistic, so while they can go from being benthic feeders, which has been traditionally their predominant means of foraging is in the benthic, in the bottom sediment. They are opportunistic, so they will feed pelagically. If they came upon a bunch of krill, they can certainly open their mouth and swallow. But because of the way they feed, which is sucking in a mouthful of mud and water from the bottom sediment, and then pushing it out with their tongue against the baleen, where the prey gets hung up on the baleen, on the brushy part of the baleen, which is on the inside of their jaw. So the prey gets hung up on the baleen and then they lick it off. So they are, as I said, predominantly they have been benthic feeders, but they are opportunistically pelagic, and more so, there's some behavior that's beginning to be observed of new areas where they're foraging. But this picture is a great one showing you the baleen hanging from the upper jaw, which, as I said, they use the baleen to filter their food. There are about 130 to 180 plates on either side of the jaw. And it's made of keratin. As the bone on the inside, as I said, is the same as our nails in our hair. And they suck in the mud and then they push it through the baleen with their tongue. And mostly what they're feeding on in Alaska is amphipods, which live in the bottom sediment and get hung up on the brushy hairs of the baleen, and then it licks it off and swallows. And most whales are right-sided. And how we know that is because when they wash up, most of the barnacles on the right side of their head are gone from that behavior of going down on the right side, plowing through the mud, sucking in a mouthful of mud and water and pushing out with their tongue. And it creates these 7-foot craters in the bottom sediments in Alaska, which is about the size of the head of a whale. And one of the fun things to do is when you have a family that comes to the information table and there's when there's a man who's tall, you ask the little boy or the little girl, how tall is the dad, or how tall is that uncle or grandfather? And to realize that that height is the size of just the head of a gray whale. And also another interpretation fact that's fun to say is to ask how many gallons of milk the child drinks a day. And they kind of look at you weird, like, gallons? Well, no, they don't even probably drink a half a gallon. But yet a calf is drinking 50 gallons of milk a day. And that takes a lot of refrigerators, right? So their diet up in Alaska, as I mentioned, is these amphipods, which are very tiny. And the whale has to eat a lot while it's up there. It's got to feed and feed and feed because it has to bulk up with the blubber, which will sustain it on the migration. Because in general, they don't feed during the southbound migration. And when they get, but as I mentioned, they can feed pelagically if they come upon a bloom. But they've got to live off of that baleen for the most part during that southbound migration. And in the lagoons, because there really isn't any food in the lagoons for them to eat, basically. So they've got to bulk up. And so they're eating about a ton when they're in Alaska, about a ton a day of these amphipods during the whole time that it's daylight. And it's estimated that they're eating about 67 tons during the 5 months that they're on the feeding grounds. And as I said, they live on that blubber store pretty much on the southbound migration and then back again to Alaska where they would feed. Next slide, yes, but they are opportunistic feeders. And the other sources of food for them, besides the amphipods, are mysid shrimp, porcelain crab larvae, the krill, as I mentioned, and then pelagic red crab. And there are other sources like skeleton shrimp and polychaete worms. And what you'll notice about all of these prey sources is how tiny they are. So here's this big 40-foot, 50-foot whale eating these tiny, tiny little critters that are as big as your fingernail, only as big as your fingernail. So that's why they've got to eat quite a lot to be able to sustain themselves in the migration and put on that blubber that will sustain them during the migration. And this slide is the beginning of some discussion that I'm going to talk about what's going on with the gray whale population. So NOAA is the federal agency that's responsible for the whales and marine mammals and data about all of them. And they put out publications annually about the population. What is the annual estimate? And it's estimations based on their observation point in Southern California and a formula that they use, a computer formula that gives them a population estimate. And what you can see from this diagram is that the population increased and then it dropped off significantly. There were two unusual mortality events. One was in the late 1990s, 1999 to 2000, and then the more recent one was in 2019 to 2023. You can see how sharply the population dropped off in that unusual mortality event. And that had to do with the lack of food availability for them. So if they cannot put on enough blubber to sustain them in the migration, what we'll start to see is skinny whales. We call them skinny whales, where you can actually see a dip in their backbone structure, not a lot of fat on the whale. And while their numbers plummeted during that UME, they started to rebound, but they never really rebounded up to the levels where of their previous population. And now we're beginning to see another drop in the population. And this chart is through 2025. And a more concerning situation that we're seeing is the lack of calves being born, because the calves, it takes about 5 years for a calf to mature to the place where it's able to conceive and be an adult. And if we don't have enough calves to sustain the population, then we are in trouble. This species is in trouble. The population, next slide, yeah. NOAA started their population counts in the late 1960s. And as I mentioned, they have a shore-based place where they sit and do these surveys. It's in Granite Canyon off Southern California, and they issue these annual abundance statistics that I mentioned based on those counts and a model. And while at one point the assumption was that there were about 27,000, we currently think that there are only about 13,000 adults in this population, and some estimates say as low as 11,000. And after these 2-year mortality events, which really contributed to the decline in the population, they did start to rebound, but then during the southbound migration in 2024 and 25, the population numbers were the lowest that they've been since the 1970s, when they really started to do a lot of the population estimates. And in 2025, the calf numbers were the lowest since 2019. And according to NOAA, this indicates that this reproduction is too low for the population to rebound. So it's a glaring warning and concern about the gray whales and what they're faced with. And Stewards is a researcher that he and his wife first started to camp out in Baja, in Laguna de San Ignacio, in the 60s and 70s. And I've heard him talk, and in the whale's Latin name is the word robustus. And he has often pointed to that as saying, hopefully they're robust and they will come back as they have after the 2 UMEs. But what we're seeing currently is not very hopeful for the population. And what we're also seeing is their expanded feeding areas. So there's been a group of gray whales that have expanded from Northern California off of Point Arena in the San Francisco Bay and the Gulf of the Farallon Islands, and then up into Oregon, Washington, and into Puget Sound. And this, next slide, this Pacific Coast feeding group and the founders, are part of a group of whales, not a lot of the entire population, that may not or do not make the full migration to Alaska. So this Pacific Coast feeding group is about 255 whales that move between Kodiak Island and Northern California, according to one of the best researchers, John Kalambokidis, who has been tracking the gray whales and blue whales for many, many years. And the initial photo ID of the gray whales was accomplished by Jim Darling in the 70s. And between his information and the Cascadia, which is John Kalambokidis' organization, photo ID, which he began in 1983, we have some idea about the number of whales in this North Coast Pacific feeding group and this Pacific Coast feeding group. And also there are a group of about, maybe it's around 20 that are called the Sounders. And they are up in Puget Sound. And they're distinct from the Pacific Coast Feeding Group as to the size and bulk of their bodies. And then we have in Depot Bay up in Oregon, there are about 75 that can be seen up there. Some people have gone up to Depot Bay to see that group that over summers in Depot Bay. And the woman who is the person that's been tracking the gray whales there, Carrie Newell, has written a book, The Summer Resident Gray Whales Along the Pacific Coast. And she's been also photo IDing these whales over the years. So she has been able to document returning gray whales to that area to feed. And mostly what they're feeding up there is because they haven't lost their kelp like we have off the head here. And mostly what they're feeding on are ghost shrimp that live on the kelp blades, and they lick it off there. Another observation point is up in Point Arena, at the Point Arena Lighthouse, and Scott and Sri Mercer and Sherry Gopher are there every day, counting and documenting the whales that they see. So they have also seen this uptick of whales in the summer off of our coast. And then out in the Gulf of the Farallones and in San Francisco Bay, we've seen an uptick in whales there. And actually in the San Francisco Bay, in a number of recent years, there have been about 75 whales that, next slide, have been hanging out in the San Francisco Bay. And while there's been an increased use of the bay by gray whales, it started in about 2016. And the data has been collected, photograph data, photography, and collection of data by the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito. And there is a photo ID catalog that was started in 2017, which has identified 75 distinct whales that have been going into the San Francisco Bay. One whale of which spent actually 75 days in San Francisco Bay until it was struck by a ship and killed. So the problem with going into the San Francisco Bay, which is their methods that they use, they're looking for bottom sediment there. Although we had a huge bloom of anchovies in the past year, which is why we saw humpbacks so close to shore throughout the summer until recently, until they started to head south to Central and South America and Mexico, where that population of humpbacks goes. They're mostly atypical in their lunge feeding and their surface skimming and their engulfing prey. So it's a very different foraging style than is typical. So while this is pointing to a flexibility of feeding strategies for the grays and an expanded foraging attempt and efforts and alternative prey that they're turning to, because they're not getting enough nutrition, they're not getting enough food in their typical feeding grounds in Alaska. The question really is the nutritional value equal? And there was a paper that was published, and I think it was 2024, by a group of scientists at the Marine Mammal Center. And as I pointed out, one of the problems for the gray whales, I mean, it's great that they're expanding, or they're trying to expand their foraging area. When they go into a place like the San Francisco Bay, what they're faced with is a very high traffic, ship traffic. So there's container ships that are going into San Francisco port, to Oakland, the port of Oakland, up into the Delta to Stockton port. And there's huge commercial ships out there. And then there's high-speed ferries that run between San Francisco and Sausalito and Larkspur. So they're they're endangered. They're in a danger area when they're trying to feed in the San Francisco Bay. And there have been quite a number of ship strikes that have caused their death and wash up their in San Francisco Bay over the last several years. And the Marine Mammal Center has been taking samples when they can get to the whales, to get the samples, to try to determine what is causing them to be in this area. And it's likely it's because they're not getting enough food in Alaska. And I think we're going to continue to see this on the part of the whales, because they're going to be looking for any possible way to expand their foraging ground to try to find more food that they're not able to find in Alaska. And so with that, I guess I'll conclude my talk. And I put this skeleton in. It's from a location up in Washington, because it's the only one I've ever seen with the baleen in the mouth, where there's a full gray whale skeleton up at McCarricker State Park. It doesn't have the baleen, where this does. And it really kind of gives you a sense of how big the head is. What I mentioned is the head is 7 feet, and how large the rib bones are and the vertebrae. And so yeah, it's a good example of the skeleton and how big it is. And then my final slide is just a great picture of a whale with the baleen in the mouth, and then a mother and a calf down in the lagoons. And with that, I'll conclude, and I'm happy to take, so I will conclude, and then I will just say that before we take a break, if I can, because we're a little ahead of time, I also will say that the whale watch coordinators that are here after the break, Colleen will discuss whale watch logistics and shift tips, and then Jeff and Jennifer and Richard will probably have some comments to add to what I have said, as far as what their experience has been out at the head for so many years. And then we also have some longtime volunteers who have been here for many, many years. And I'm happy to take questions. Yeah.
Why do the moms and calves leave the lagoons first on the northbound journey?
Well, because the question is, why do the mothers and the calves leave the lagoons first? And the answer is because at the time that they begin to, when they leave, the calf has reached maturity, and it's such that, not hasn't reached maturity, but it's strong enough and big enough that it can sustain the northbound migration.
They leave last.
And it has, it has grown sufficiently that the mother is confident that it can make the northbound migration. And so, and she hasn't eaten for a year, and she's kind of hungry. So she wants to get back up to the feeding grounds in Alaska to feed again. Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned breaching is not a common behavior at Bodega Head, but how about spy hopping?
Yeah, spy hopping. when I say breaching is not a common behavior, what I'm saying is that humpbacks, we see them breaching all the time. The gray whales, yeah, we'll see breaching out there, but they're not an acrobatic whale like the humpbacks are. So we can see breaching, but it's not as common a behavior for the gray whales as for the humpback. And when we're out there looking, so you don't need a scope for sure. And you don't necessarily need binoculars, although they're nice. If you practice long enough, you're able to see a spout and get your glasses up fast enough to be able to look through your binoculars and catch it the next time it comes up to breathe or before it goes down again. But when we're up there, mostly what we're looking for first are the blows. And it's pretty exciting to see the blow. And people get very emotional, they get, wow, look at the blow, there's a whale. And it's even great for the long-time whale watching. I mean, I don't think you ever get tired of seeing a whale, of seeing a blow and watching for the back. And especially when it's the mother and the calf that comes by and they're so close. It's really a great experience to see them. Yes,
So can you define breaching?
I'm sorry.
Can you define breaching, please?
Oh, breaching is when so when they spy hop, it's just they're spy hopping in that picture there of the mother and the calf. It's when the head comes out of the water, and breaching would be the entire body, almost the entire body out of the water, and then a big splash.
So when they come up just to take air, what do you call that?
Just surfacing,
Surface.
yeah. Mhm,
Thank you.
mhm.
What makes the sounders distinct?
I'm sorry?
You said that the sounders, the gray whale sounders had something to distinguish them. What was it that distinguished?
So they're smaller, their body size is smaller, girth-wise and lengthwise. So, if I didn't put a slide in to show that, but there are slides available that show the sounders juxtaposed upon a normal sized gray whale. And what you can see is that both the girth and the length of the whale is distinguished from the Pacific Coast breeding group, which are part of the entire population which migrates. It's just that group, the Pacific Coast foraging group, doesn't go all the way to Alaska. But the sounders up in Puget Sound are distinct body-wise.
But they do the whole migration like the others, or they don't go all the way?
I'm sorry,
The sounders do the same migration as the rest of the whales, or do they not do that?
they don't go all the way to Alaska. And most of the Pacific Coast feeding group doesn't go all the way to the Alaska. What we see, the Mercers see off of Point Arena, and what are seen in the Gulf of the Farallones, the Farallon Islands, those may or may not go all the way to Alaska. We don't typically tag gray whales like other marine mammals are tagged to be able to see where they're migrating before the tag falls off. So what we depend on for the sounders and for the Pacific Coast feeding group, as well as the group off of Point Arena, are eyes on the ocean. We call it citizen scientists. That's us, if we're whale watchers, looking out and seeing what we can see, and then keeping track of it over time, over a season, from year to year, and month to month and year to year.
But do the sounders still go south for
Yes,
mating?
yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
And are they, I'm sorry to keep asking about the sounders, it's kind of fascinating, are their calves growing at the same proportionate size as they are? You know what I mean? Or is it just an
that,
adult?
I've never seen any, research into that as to whether. Now, one could speculate that they might be smaller, but the range of calves when they're born, their size, really it ranges quite a bit in length and and how much they weigh. So whether you can distinguish a sounder calf is really, in my opinion, questionable. Yeah. Yeah.
And how, given that the humpbacks also come up and down the coast, how come what we're learning about is the gray whales?
Because the whale migration was the basis for whale watch that started in 1986 by a woman, B. Brunn started the whale watch program for Stewards. And it's because we can reliably see whales, gray whales, off the head. We don't reliably it's not, I wouldn't say as reliable to see humpbacks. They migrate in a different time frame and they follow food sources that may or may not be there. Like this last year, we had an amazing anchovy, amount of anchovy off at the coast. And so, well, the humpbacks were there, yeah, for sure. But we want to do a program where there's some reliable consistency. And so we know that the gray whales reliably migrate from Alaska to Baja and back. So that makes it pretty hopefully, you can see the gray whales during the migration, during that time frame. We know when they go north, we know when they come south. So it makes sense to have people stationed out there. And what we do is we have a table set up like over here with whale bones and baleen, and we have some examples of lice, and we have information like is on the back table of a card that we put together that shows the information about the gray whale that we can hand out to people. And we also have information. The other thing about the head is that the head is a marine protected area. It's part of a series of marine protected areas that go along the coast, predominantly of California. And the resources, the land, the plants and the animals on Bodega Head are protected. And then out in the ocean, we're off of a marine sanctuary, the Gulf of the Farallones National Marine Sanctuary. So the waters are protected. You cannot fish. There's a no-take zone off of the head. So it's a very special area for those reasons, that is very protected. And as I said, it's that mostly reliable, when they're going to be going north, generally starting the majority of the time. We start in January because then that's when we start to see most of the southbound migration. Although, I've seen gray whales off of Bodega Head in November and December. But the majority of the population is going to be moving south in January and February in through about the middle of March. Again, out on the horizon, using a southward trending current, the California current. And we know about when they go north. using the Davidson current. And so it makes sense for us to be there on the weekends to interpret to the public when they come out to Bodega Head, many of whom don't come to Bodega Head to see whales. They don't even know that they're there. You know, they stumble upon us, if you will, and our table with the artifacts and the information. But they're generally very open and interested in the information that we have to give.
So could a Pacific gray whale eat anchovies if it happens to be?
I can't hear her. Can you,
Can a Pacific gray whale eat anchovies?
yeah. That's about the largest prey source that they can eat. Yeah, I've seen a great picture of a gray whale in San Francisco Bay coming up out of the water, having gulped, gotten into a bait ball of anchovies and having gulped the anchovies, so coming up out of the water and anchovies flying out of its mouth. So yeah,
Which is.
but
yeah,
mostly
perfect.
the prey has to be pretty small because their throat opening is only the size of a grapefruit. So they can't eat large fish, and they don't have teeth, so they can't bite and tear apart a fish. They have to rely on sucking the bottom sediment, gulping in when they're migrating through, and swimming, side swimming, and essentially they're ingesting water and mud to get enough prey to sustain themselves in the migration.
I was wondering about the lice and the barnacles. Isn't that why the humpbacks breach to get them off? Do they live copacetically with the gray whales? Do they try to get them off? Are they beneficial? What's the relationship between lice and barnacles?
The relationship between the lice and the barnacles on the gray whales? Is that what you're asking?
So
Are they-
when a baby, so I hope I'm answering your question because I didn't hear it. When the baby is born, it's just solid gray, black. And within about an hour, barnacles climb up onto the baby and attach into the blubber and then live out their life cycle on that gray whale.
Does it hurt the whale in any way?
I'm sorry?
Is it harmful to the whale?
Oh, well, no, they have a symbiotic, relationship, I suppose you could call it. The barnacle feeds in the water column as the whale is diving. So the barnacles are alive. They have tentacles that come out of the middle of the barnacle and they feed in the water column. The lice, not so much. The lice are living, although they perform a benefit to the gray whale, the lice are cleaning. If the gray whale gets a cut, the lice would clean the cut. And they also, as skin sloughs off of the whale, the lice will eat the skin. So they perform a benefit, if you will. But I don't know, someone said, are they itchy? I don't know. Maybe, but certainly we've seen the whales in like at the mouth of the Russian River, and other places scraping up against rocks. So we believe that's because they're trying to get rid of some barnacles. Yeah.
If you have barnacles on the bottom of your boat, you scrape them off for speed.
Yeah. That's right. And that's, as I mentioned, they're one of the slower swimming of the large whales. They're only swimming like 3 to 5 miles an hour. And that might be a function of having barnacles, but other whales have barnacles and it doesn't slow them down. They're just a slow moving whale, and because they're traveling 24/7 for the most part, and they have a trajectory, they know where they're going to and why they're going there. And then when they leave there, they know where they're going and why. So they know they're going pretty much north to Alaska to feed and south to Baja to mate and have calves. And along the way, all of the above, as they opportunistically may come upon prey.
I have one last question.
Yeah.
Are the only effects on these whale populations, their opportunity for feeding, or are there other effects like predation and things like that that are maybe involved that are causing some serious part of the issue?
Okay, so the question is, what can impact population numbers?
Right.
And the population numbers are mostly affected by ability to get enough food. And with the changing conditions in the oceans, and again, that's why they're forced into places like San Francisco Bay. But also, ship strikes are a major, really, they are a major impact on the population. Entanglements in fishing gear and crab pots are an impact on the population. There's NOAA papers that will show you the number of entanglements, a graph of all of the types of whales and how many of those have been entangled over the last year. The highest entanglement is humpbacks. But that's a whole other talk. And then did they have a natural predator? Yeah, orca. So there are three kinds of orca that live off of the West Coast. There's the population that lives up off of Washington and Vancouver area. They are fish eaters, and that population, their residents, and they're in big trouble.
Yeah.
Because of the lack of salmon. And because also of the pollutants and how that impacts their blubber and their ability to carry calves. And once the calves are born, for the calves to survive. There's another type of whale which is not in the same kind of trouble. It's called bigs. They used to be called transient, but they're pretty much referred to as Briggs orca. They prey on mammals, mostly seals and sea lions up in the Northwest, but all along the coast. And they're smart because they're called killer whales, but they're not really whales. They're orca. They're toothed mammals, and they're very aggressive and they're very smart. Dolphins are on the highest intelligence of any of the mammals. And what they will do is they go to places, especially where you'll see them is in Monterey Bay. Because they know when the mother and the calf get there. So the mother and the calf travel along the coast close in, and the mother keeps the calf on the inside of her. So she's trying to protect the calf with her bulk and the coastline so that the orca can't see the calf to come and attack the calf. But when they get to Monterey Bay, it's a big bay. It's wide open. So many of the females with their calves will go straight across the bay, and that makes the calves particularly vulnerable to attack by the orca. And that's where quite a lot of calves are lost. And they hunt in a group. They're a pack animal, if you will. So they'll go after the calves the mother will sometimes try to protect her calf by putting it on her stomach. And she can hold her breath for 15 minutes. But often the worker will go up to the female and punch the female until the calf falls off, and then attack the calf and yank out the tongue, because that's what they're after, and leave the rest of the calf. Yeah. And that happens also off of the Kodiak Islands up in Alaska. Yeah.
Three groups?
Yeah, there's an ocean going. The ocean going orca, we don't know as much about because they're very wide ranging. They like shark. They'll eat shark. So there's the resident that eat salmon. There's the bigs who eat mammals, and there's the ocean going to go after shark. And the two that we know the most about are the resident and the bigs. Yeah.
When these whales are migrating back and forth, what size groups do they go in?
What time?
So what size are the groups? How many? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, the grays are pretty solitary. They don't normally travel in groups like other whales do. We may see, what we often will see is a mother and a calf. And then I like to refer to the other whales that are with that mother and calf as the anti-escort, because these are likely females who have lost their calves in the migrations. So there may be 3 or 4 together. You know, we can see a number of whales together, but generally not high numbers of whales traveling together. They're a solitary migrator mostly. And I caveat everything I say because the population is in such flux right now, and based on basically really climate change with their food source, that a lot of what we have known to be consistent about their behavior is changing. And we're learning more about these changes as time goes on, which then has an impact on what we say about is their normal behavior. Yeah.
Is there research historically going back, whatever, 100, 200 years, to see any other adaptive behaviors in them, you know what I mean?
Are there,
Like, is there an evolution of that adaptation of gray whales? Is there research around that?
How far back does the research go about adaptive behavior?
yeah. Well, really, the changes that we're seeing have been really happening for the gray whales since the unusual mortality event that happened in between 2019 and 2023. And that's all, as I said, based on the NOAA site in Granite Canyon where they've been observing. And there are many research eyes out on the ocean, all up and down our coast and in Oregon and Washington and Alaska. And there are a lot of researchers and a lot of papers that are written about changes in behavior of the gray whales and the humpbacks. I would say that the humpbacks are there's more known and more published about the humpbacks because they are a more dramatic whale. You know, when people think of a whale, they pretty much think of the humpback because of its breaching behavior. And also because people go to Hawaii and there's a population of humpbacks that are reliably seen in Hawaii. That's not the population that we generally see. We're generally seeing the population that migrates to Mexico and South America, Central America. But like Happy Whale, for example, is a website that's been tracking whales for years and years, and it's pretty much humpbacks. And it's just that they're a more sexy, if you will. Humpbacks are much more, well, they're much more out there, you know, when they're there, you know they're there, you know, they're breaching, they're just incredible. Where grays, as I like to say, you know, it's gray whale watch, not whale see, because it's really, you don't know when you're gonna see them. And we're there 4 hours, our shifts are 4 hours. We may see none, we may see 20 over that period. So they're more, it's more iffy. Yeah.
I actually want to stop because it's about time to take a break.
Yeah.
This might take a little longer,
Go
but
ahead.
it's a far-fetched question.
Uh-oh.
Realizing that Fukushima nuclear power plant explosion, and then coming to today with the political land grab and sea grab for mining, and also maybe some volcanic activity off of Oregon, like 60 miles out. Can any of this, or do you know if there's any study regarding populations, food scarcity due to these kinds of world or climate events happening?
Yeah, I would say, like, you know, the Marine Mammal Center and John Kalambokidis in Cascadia Research definitely has been in the forefront of research about what is happening to all of the megafauna, all of the whales, blue whales, gray whales, and also sea lions and seals, because the other thing that happens out in the ocean is this domoic acid, and, you know, some of the, lately, you know, we've had a lot of loss of the smaller marine mammals like seals and sea lions due to that poisoning event. So yeah, there's quite a bit of research, but again, it's a big ocean, and we don't tag these animals. So their researchers go out in boats. The Fulmar is a boat that goes out, and it's often out of our harbor here. So yeah, there are boats that go out that are research boats. NOAA and others. Yeah. So I think we have to end, but we have to take a break. Oh no, we have to, yeah, we have to take a break and then we'll come back.
Okay. Welcome back, everyone, from break, and take it away, Rich and Colleen.
Okay, we're so glad to be here, at least virtually, and to see such a nice turnout. It's interesting hearing Norma talking about the sort of the demise of the gray whale right now, because when we started over 30 years ago, the gray whale was on the endangered species list. So, boy, we've seen lots of differences over time, and hoping that it'll come back once again. We've been asked to talk about a few things about being out on the head, the actual nitty-gritty of it. One of the things that I often notice when I'm standing next to a visitor who really wants to see a whale and is having difficulty when we say, oh, there's a spout, and they say, didn't see it. And then I turn around and look at them And if they don't have a polarized lens on their sunglasses, it really makes it a lot harder to see, and also with the naked eye. So as volunteers, I really recommend that you have the polarized lens in your glasses. It really cuts the glare quite a bit. It's so important to dress in layers out there.
Can you hold
It
on just 1 second? I'm having a little trouble for some reason with the video. I want to make sure that you're up on the screen.
Okay.
I'm not. Okay. Okay, sorry about that. Colleen, go ahead.
Sure. And just talking about the layers that you need, maybe even want to keep some extras in your vehicle, just in case it's a really windy day out there, which happens, and or just cold. So, you know, gloves and hats. And also, like something with a visor helps, again, to help cut glare from the water. It over time, I found that that can be very helpful. Then Rich was going to talk about the actual shifts that we have. So here he is.
Okay, we currently are running shifts from 10 until 2 on Saturdays and Sundays. We changed that scheduling during the COVID period and realized that generally we had better viewing in the mornings than we did the late afternoons. And the late afternoons also get quite windy out on the head. So 10 until 2, we encourage you to sign up because the coordinators for a given day will have access to that list of scheduled volunteers. And if for any reason it is necessary to cancel that day because of weather or other conditions, they can notify you ahead of time instead of you're having to drive out there only to find out that the session was canceled. So please do sign up. Pick the dates that look good for you. If at any point you're not signed up, but you choose to come out, you will be welcome, and the more the merrier.
And also, I think Norma mentioned about how we have a table usually placed just below the actual head. When you go out there today, you'll see how that works. But then we have all of our display on the table, and we like to have people down there talking, you know, presenting those objects. And then, of course, most very importantly, we want the people up on the headland so that they can spot the whales. And excuse me, it's really a good idea and important for you to kind of keep your eye on what's going on, and if there are people on one place or another, and find a spot so that you can kind of, if you're new to being a whale watcher, you can find out just by listening, maybe how some of the veteran people have developed their little pattern. And sometimes we only speak to people for a very short time. So even though we've had a wonderful presentation today of a lot of information, it often happens that you really don't spend a lot of, you don't have to have a big presentation ready for them. Then if you bring a chair that's fine, that you can take out time if you are needing to sit down. But we do like to see people standing as much as possible so that you're more on an eye level with the visitors, and it makes you more accessible, I feel. If you would like to have a snack or lunch, just kind of, again, keep an eye out and make sure we have enough coverage, and maybe let the coordinator know that you're going to maybe go down and sit in your car and have a little break. So it's done very informally. So it's not like there is a period for lunch at that time. I think.
Actually, the coordinators also on a given day may shorten the scheduled time and send everybody home early. And that's particularly if the conditions result in there being no visitors on the head. As has been mentioned in the past, we can do the docent work of interacting with the public when there are no whales there, but we can't do it when there are no people there. So on certain days, you may be sent home early, but you will be given credit for the full 4 hours.
Okay. So maybe turn it back to you and get some more comments, maybe from Jeff.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
A question. What's the difference between the coordinator and the volunteers?
Okay, the question is, what's the difference between the coordinators and the volunteers? The answer was money. Norm, I think, is going to answer that.
Really?
So the coordinator person that's responsible for that shift. So they will make sure that they're there before 10 o'clock, open up the room where we keep all of the supplies and the bones and the baleen, and move the table and everything out to set it up. With the help, we always need the help of volunteers to do that. And then the coordinator essentially is responsible for setup and takedown of the site to do the interpretation. And then the volunteers are there to help everybody see the whales if they're there to be seen, and then to talk with people about the information, the bones, the baleen. We have a big poster of that replicates this poster over here on the table. We set up the poster, and people like to look at that to see all the various marine mammals that are along our coast. So that's pretty much it. The volunteers, we couldn't do it without the volunteers. We can't do it with just a coordinator. We need the volunteers to help us both at the table. As Colleen said, it's great to be at the table and talk to people as they show up, because as I said earlier, a lot of people come out to the head, they don't know that we're going to be there. But then they're there and we're there, the table's there with all kinds of information to give to people. And then the overlook area, we need to have volunteers, because the more eyes that are looking at the horizon or close in looking for the blow, the better it is. Because somebody sees the blow and they can point you to exactly where the blow is, and then everybody else will be able to see. And I like to walk along back and forth, and I think Jeff does that, and I think we all do that. We don't stand in one particular place. We move back and forth, and I have no compunction about just walking up to people who are there and starting to engage them. Hey, did you know that we are looking for whales and we might see them? And just start to talk to people, interpreting that way.
Yeah, between setup and takedown, the coordinators are just regular volunteers.
Hopefully.
How many volunteers do you like to have on a shift?
The more the merrier.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's no real, I mean, usually usually we have maybe 3 or 4 down below and 3 or 4 above would be ideal, I suppose. But as I said, the more the merrier.
During the COVID period, we did try to limit the number of volunteers out there just because of
Yeah, but that's
all the
history.
rules against, large
That's
groups getting
history.
together.
You don't need to worry about how many volunteers. Now it's the more the merrier.
That is true.
Gotcha.
Yes. And so please come out even if you're not signed up.
Okay.
So do I understand correctly? It's more about interaction with the public. We're not recording any.
That's right. Yeah, we
data
do
about
not count whales. We are there to interpret about the gray whales and to engage the public in information about the gray whales, about the migration, and about the place where we are, the head. Yeah.
Yep.
So
I do have a
somebody else, I'm sorry.
question.
Oh, I'm sorry,
So
Bernadine.
as far as docents are, what about, interacting on the trails or around the head?
Not go out on the trails. We're not interpreting the trails on the head. If you want to leave and go out on the trails, in fact, there's a trail that goes all the way up to the end that overlooks Bodega Rock. And that's a great place to see the mothers and the calves as they're coming from the south, from Point Reyes. They come around Point Reyes. They come at us at an angle and they stop there. Sometimes the mothers will stop there and nurse the calf down by the jetty. That's all fine. But once you leave the parking lot and the area where the table interpretation is, we ask that you take